Hey, I'm so glad you guys are here at all of our campuses and all the way down the Gulf Coast, all the way over to Jones County in Laurel. And we're in a series, if you've not been here, called Hide It or Heal It. And here's the big idea so that you can get this. And for some people, this is a new concept that, just like your body can be broken, or your body can get run down, or your body can be injured, you have a soul inside of you that can also be injured by trauma and stress and all kinds of things that come into our lives. You know, the enemy is out for your soul because the soul lasts forever. And so we've been talking about that you are body, okay, and your spirit, the Spirit of God lives in you, and you're also a soul. And so I've been walking through that because I think it's so important. It's taken me years to kind of begin to realize that there's stuff going on inside of me that I want to keep hidden, that I need to kind of get it out in the open so that I'll know about it, first of all, because a lot of stuff we keep hidden, we hide it because we don't want to think about it. And so the very first week, I talked about the power of shame. And if you've never read about shame or you've never done any work with regard to the shame in your life, you are missing out on freedom. Because shame is different from guilt. Guilt is where you've done something wrong and you feel bad, okay? But shame says to you, you are bad. You are broken. You are a second-class citizen. And when I went to counseling the first time, because I've been a lot of different times, I like to try them all out. And the guy said, what do you think you're feeling? I said, well, I'm feeling anger. He said, no, what you're feeling is shame. He said, you're reacting. Anger is out here, and that's what people see. But you're getting that, like the foundation of your anger that you're launching from is shame. And so I wrote down this definition that shame says, I am stained, defective, I'm a second-class citizen because of what I did or what was done to me. And for a lot of people, it's not just what you did, it's what was done to you, what was said to you. And many of you grew up like me. You grew up in an environment, if you're older especially, where people thought the best way to train you and encourage you was to tell you were sorry. I'm not kidding. All my coaches, man, you're sorry, man. You think you're something. Hey, Hollywood. Oh, you think, and that was to inspire you. You mow the yard and your dad comes in, well, you missed a spot over there, fool. Anybody else had that experience where, somebody's shaming you all the time, and this is the woman at the well, and she shows up with her jar of shame, as a big jar, and she had been with 5 men, she had had 5 husbands, and the one she was with now was not her husband. And she had this shame bond. A lot of people have shame bonds to people that will shame them because that's all they know. A lot of people will grow up in an abusive home, and guess what? They marry an abusive person. Isn't that crazy? Because that's all they know. And so Jesus says, let me give you some fresh water here. He says, let me tell you about me because I love you and I am the Messiah. And she goes, I want that. I want to be clean. I want to get rid of my shame. I want salvation. Give me this. And she leaves her jar of shame and goes back into the city and begins to tell everybody, hey, he knows everything I've done. And he told me about you and you and you and you and you. And he says he can forgive us. Kyle Warren did a great message on Job. And I love the whole big idea of Job is, hey, when things fall apart in your life, you don't know the story behind it. But even when God is silent and there is a fog, like there was early this morning, and you can't see and you have to slow down, God is still there. And 30 plus chapters where God doesn't speak and Job keeps like just kind of chipping away is why I say, just curse God and die, I'm like, well, God, why didn't you take her? And just chipping and chipping and chipping and chipping, because what you do in the dip has everything to do with what happens when you come out of the dip. That's a word. Thank you. I'll take that. Yeah. And I wish we could do a whole, there's so much I want to say to you. Like right now, some of you are hurting and you're like it's a fog and things are bad. And you're like, I just can't do this, man. If you'll just take one more little step with God's help, you'll find out, when you look back, you'll go, I cannot believe I went that far. I cannot believe I have come this far because I thought I was going backwards. No, everything else is going backwards. It was an optical illusion. You're going forward. And then we had Lee Smith come, and man, Lee is a godly man. Like, he is a licensed counselor. He's a great counselor, but he's a Christian, and like he helps people through the lens of the Bible and the Spirit. And he said, hey man, nothing is better than you getting with someone who can draw that out of you. And the enemy has kept people like you and me from going to counseling because of our pride. The very thing that got the devil kicked out of heaven. Oh, I don't need that. Some of you grew up in homes. Oh, you're just crazy, man. You're crazy, like your uncle and them. You don't need that. Listen, do not listen to them. You are not crazy. But everybody needs someone. Like, if you break something, you go to physical therapy. You don't think anything wrong with that, do you? But when you're broken, you don't go to emotional therapy? I mean, would you work with me here? And so we kind of rolled through that. Then we got to Elijah last week. And I thought that sermon was so good. And, occasionally I'll go, God, that was a good message. No, the delivery wasn't that great, but the word was amazing, because here's a man of God who runs out of gas. He goes and 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 he goes, I'm doing this for God. No, he's doing this for himself. I'm telling you, you get up on the stage, you start thinking about yourself a little bit. Whoa, when I look, whoa. That's when you get in trouble. And he gets to the cave and he is so broken down, he wants to die. And God simply says to him, hey man, would you just stop talking and would you lay down and take a nap? Would you rest? Would you cut some things out of your schedule? We got this weekend, Saturday, we got 3 kids. One of them's got to be at basketball, one of them's got to be at baseball, and one of them's got to be at soccer, and there's 2 of us, and they're different places. It's hard to do unless you're the Holy Spirit. And so the idea was, hey, when you need to slow down and realize you've outrun your capacity, that you begin to get help and you kind of pull some things back and you go, God, I need help. And some of you, the food you need is medication because you've got a chemical imbalance that's genetic. You say, that's not a faith. Yes, it is a faith. Let me tell you, I pray in faith and I go to the CVS, and that's what's kept me from murdering some of you. No, I'm not kidding you. Some of you I'd have already murdered. If you don't tighten up, I'm gonna get off my medicine. Okay, all right. But today I want to talk about something 100% of you deal with. And if you're not dealing with it, you will. And if you're in it, there's hope. And if you're coming out of it, there's a testimony. And it's grief. You say, I don't know what grief. Why are we talking about grief in church? Because God grieved. Genesis 6:6 says, when God saw humanity, he grieved that he had made mankind. Oh, that's terrible. Jesus wept. Jesus grieved over Jerusalem. Jesus was a man acquainted with grief and sorrow. Paul said, hey, you must grieve, but you don't grieve like those who have no hope. Now, I've got a little definition for grief, and these are all mine. You won't find these anywhere else in the world. Grief, in my opinion, is God-given capacity to deal with loss in a healthy way. The word grief appears 275 times in the Bible. Grief is a big deal because you're going to suffer loss. And it doesn't have to be big things. I mean, you don't get chosen for a sport. You don't make the all-star team. Man, that's grief. You say, well, that's like puppy love. Well, it's a big deal if you're a puppy. If you're 10 years old. And there's grief there, and there's loss there, and there's hurt there. And what do you do with that? Well, there's a little book in the Bible tucked away in the Old Testament, 56 verses, where you get to see behind the curtain with one man who has a conversation with God, and you get to see the stages of grief that he walked through. And it's only a conversation between him and God. And his name is Habakkuk. Now, how many of you have heard messages on Habakkuk? Raise your hand. You heard a series on Habakkuk, okay? 2 people. Okay, great. Well, it's in the Bible, believe it or not, and you can go to our app and you can see the scripture, or if you have a Bible that looks like this, they have these things that are made of paper that you can also use. And I want to read to you out of Habakkuk, and I want to show you the stages of grief when you are faced with loss and change and things you can't control. You are going through the process of grief that God created you to go through. And if you go, I'm not doing that, then you'll get stuck there. And so here's the first stage, and the first stage is simply this, where you are shocked and you are angry. If you've ever lost anything, if you've ever had some tragedy, you can't believe it's happening. Did you hear? Did you hear? So here he is, Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 2. And look how relevant the Bible is. He says, how long, Lord, must I call for help and you won't listen? He says, I cry out violence, but you don't save. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are ever before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. The law, therefore, is paralyzed and justice never prevails. Have you ever said that? The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. And the Lord answers him. I want to tell you something, and I'll talk about this in a second, but if you really prayed and God spoke to you, you know what? You'd have to change your clothes. And this is what he says. He says, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I'm about to do something in your days that you would not believe it, even though I'm telling you. He says, you ain't going to believe this. You say, what is all of that like? How does that work into grief? Well, it works into grief that this is the first stage of grief where you go, why? Why is this happening to me? Why would a good God allow this to happen to me? I love him. I have served him. I went to church. I went to Easter. I went to Christmas Eve service. I have tried my best to do right. I don't do like these other people do. It's shocked. Like, I can't believe this. Have you ever been at that point where you just say, God, why? God, why can't I find somebody? God, why did I have to lose my job? God, why did I have to lose my friend? COVID, you probably remember COVID. It happened in 2020. And I saw the whole world going through grief. There was this shock, like, how could this happen? Like, God, how can you allow the whole world to be shut down? And I remember on Easter, about this time in 2020, I was standing on this stage preaching to an empty room, and I was saying in my mind as I was preaching about hope, God, why? We can't gather. We can't see each other. We can't talk to each other. The mask, man, who was mad about the mask? Would you raise your hand? Yeah, the rest of you, we were mad at you. And so here's in the political environment, I mean, everybody's angry and it's so polarized and people are looking for something to be offended by, and you don't have to look very far. And this was Habakkuk. And so God speaks to him and says, well, let me tell you the answer to your prayer. Why, Lord? How long? What you going to do? He goes, well, I'm going to raise up the Babylonians. You know, the people over in that Iran region of the world, and I'm going to raise them up because they're so bad, I'm going to bring them in to do scorched earth on Israel so that I can discipline you. He says, huh? See, if you ask God a question and he answered you, that's what you'd say. You know why? Because you ain't God. You're stuck in time. He could say, well, here's a cool thing, okay, Habakkuk. Daniel is going to rise up and be in charge of Babylon, and there's going to be Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and then Nebuchadnezzar is going to turn to God and serve him. And then a long time, 2,000 years from now, there's going to be 3 wise men who will sit on a coffee table, and they're going to bring, like Jesus, some treasures. And he says, huh? Do you know when you get to heaven, one of the first things you're going to say when you walk into heaven? Oh, I see. I see now. But you're not going to see it all right now because you're not God. It'd be like you trying to explain to a kindergartner all about astronomy and all about like science and everything that they could not possibly understand, magnified. So there's shock and anger. You're mad because you're not God and you don't understand and you want to know why. But here's the second stage. The second stage is denial and depression. Look at Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 1. And after God answers him, he says, well, I'll stand at my watch and station myself on the wall of Jerusalem, and I will look to see what you will say to me and what answer I'm to give to this complaint. In other words, I'm going to look to see my response to what you say. And God begins to respond. He says, well, write down this revelation and make it plain on the tablets so that a herald may run with it, for the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, you're stuck in the waiting room, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. Now, I love that. And here's Habakkuk. He's going, I'm just going to watch and see if that happens. I don't think it's going to happen. And he waits and he waits and he waits. Well, I think this may happen. Then all of a sudden he gets depressed. Have you ever been depressed? Depression, unless it's chemical, is where you're angry and you turn it inward and you won't tell anybody and you get down into a deep hole and all of a sudden you can't get out and everything is dark and everything is black and everything is, you're hurt in every way and there's no hope and there's nothing around you where things are going to work out. And the reality is when you're depressed, it feels like everything in your life has been shattered. If I could tell you how many people that I've talked to that are just like that. Brokenness in their life. I want you to hear one of those stories from Jean, and I want you to hear how God has brought her through the greatest losses a human being could go through. Listen to this.
Well, my dad was one of the founders of Hattiesburg Clinic, one of the 8 original doctors. We moved here from Laurel to do that. My brothers are doctors, my sisters are nurse practitioners. My father offered to send me to medical school when Matt was very small, my son, and I knew that I would not get to be a mother to him if I did something like that. So I had to make a choice, and I chose to be the mother and work that 9 to 5, 8 to 5 on weekdays, and so that's where my career path went. I've been through some very, very hard times. My marriage fell apart. I had my son, and it was just the two of us, and it was me and him against the world. He was a national merit finalist. He was a great athlete. He could make people laugh. He had the greatest sense of humor. He was the prize. And I thought, God is going to do something with him because he is so incredible and I'm so gifted to have him in my life. And then I lost him. He was killed by a drunk driver, and right before he turned 21. I was devastated. I was shattered. I didn't know that I would survive, and I came very close at times not surviving, except that I had made a promise. We made a promise to each other one time that if anything happened to the other, we would go on. And I told him, I said, Matt, I thought about that. You need to promise me if something happens to me that you'll be strong and you'll make it. I know you'll grieve and I know you'll hurt. You'll have the rest of your life to live, and I will be proud of you if you go on and live it and do something meaningful. And he said, Mama, don't you think I feel the same way? He said, you've dedicated your whole life to me. And he said, I need to know you'll go on too. And he did the finger thing, and I went, I cannot do this. And then I thought, I've just got to lie. Put that finger in and we promised. And after they told me he was dead, that was the first thing that came to my mind was, why did you make me promise that? I was looking up a pottery term and I came across the term kintsukuroi. And I went, what in the world is that? So I looked it up, it came up, and it dropped me to my knees. I went, oh my goodness, if I could have only had a piece of this when Matt died to remind me day in and day out that if I keep going, God can put those pieces back together. In ancient Japan, they passed down pottery from generation to generation. They had tea sets and other things that had been handed down for 400 years in the same family. If they broke it, it was a tragedy. But they would take it to a kintsukuroi artist who would put all the pieces back together with gold, with the understanding that it is more valuable now for having been broken and having the gold in it than it was before. And we are too, if we use the brokenness that we've been through to help others going through the same thing, we become more valuable. I said, I think I could make this. And that's when I bumped into Susan.
Well, when Jean called and she said, I am just on fire about this, kintsukuroi. And I said, what? I had no idea what it was. But when she told me, I said, well, Jean, I do pottery all the time. I would love to, to do it with you. And I said, now, I can't break it. If I make it, you got to break it. So she's always, and really, that's the harder job.
The breaking is therapeutic, especially if you've been having a bad day. And the putting back together is therapeutic because you get a sense of loving this pot and wanting it to be beautiful again and wanting it to be valuable. And you think maybe that's how God is feeling when we're hurting, together. There's some pots that don't want to be put back together. Sometimes you have to just pull it all apart and clean the adhesive stuff off and start over again and not give up. And God doesn't give up on us, If sometimes there is a piece that's so shattered, it won't fit back in. But it can be, the space can be filled. It can be filled with something valuable. And people who've lost, they feel like they're walking skin and they're empty. And you have to find something to fill that emptiness. And God can do it. And it may not be exactly what it was before, but it can give you a purpose in life. I started off by making a piece for myself, and then I began to give it to people I knew who'd lost children. And then people started wanting to give it to this person or that person, and that's what I do now. And that's my, I'm also a painter. That's my artwork. This is my heart work. So
I love the symbolism of, once we were broken, but we're back together, and the beauty of the whole kintsukuroi. It's just really meaningful. I'm so pleased to be a part of it.
It's just taught me perseverance and leaning on God and trusting even when you think it's not going like it's supposed to, when you want to rail at Him. At least you're railing at Him because you know He exists. It's perseverance and encouragement of others and some sort of symbolism which people can look at day in and day out. And I finally looked at the piece I made for myself and I went, Jean, you're not struggling to get there, you're there. You've already been put back together and you're trying to use that to help other people struggling to be put back together. You can look at it in struggle, but you can look at it in victory also.
Some pots are hard to break. I love that. But I tell you, the world brings enough pressure on all of us that at some point, there's a breaking point. Some pots are hard to mend. And I have seen people take not just weeks or months, but years And each breaking is as unique as a thumbprint. And when people say to you, I know what you're going through, they do in general, but specifically, they don't. And I got to thinking, and one of our staff members, Kelsey, said, hey, not only that, but when you refuse to work through the healing process and let God put you back together, it's not just you that's shattered, but the people who love you get hurt and cut. And so as we look at Habakkuk, I'm going to show you where Jean has gotten to in her life, which is a remarkable statement. The third stage is acceptance and healing. Listen to what Habakkuk says, and it's so powerful. I've come to it several times in my life. And the third chapter, verse 17, he says, though the fig tree does not bud and there's no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in my Savior, because the sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights. He's starting to move forward in his grief. You say, well, I'm not there yet. Listen to this. Everything will be made right in the end. And if it's not right now, it's not the end. God has you. He loves you. You say, well, Jeff, how do you know that? Well, because Jesus was shattered on the cross. Not just he was beaten. He was shattered. And 3 days later, when he walks out of that tomb, and the disciples are putting their fingers on the scars on his hands, and the scars on his feet, and the puncture wound on his side, they're seeing a treasure that saves the world. I got to thinking about 26 years ago, I did the math on it, when Jean lost Matt, and I never want to go through that. But she could have no idea 26 years later that Matt would bring hope to thousands of people. It's the way God works. Out of death, he brings life. You may be in a dark season, but the light is coming. There's hope for you. There's healing for you. God sees you where you are, and he walks with you. In a moment, you're going to have time to respond. And at all of our campuses, you can come down to the front and pray, because I know there are a lot of you grieving, because I talked to you. You can come to the cross and you can place something on the cross there that you're going, hey, God, I need help with this because I don't understand and I'm stuck. But I hope most of you will come to the table and take the elements. And when you peel back that top layer and get to that little wafer and you crush that in your finger, remember what he did for you. I don't serve Jesus because I have to. I serve Jesus because I can't help it. His body was shattered for you. His blood, we sang about it, was spilt for you. Don't ever think God doesn't care. She said, it hurts me to break a pot. You think it doesn't pain God who made you to see you broken? He wants to make you into a treasure. He's not giving up on you. He's about to give you your best life with him. Treasure. Would you bow your heads? Prepare your hearts to worship the God who's putting you back together. Oh, they thought they had you. They thought you were down for the count. They had no idea at the right time, at the right moment. He's back. He's back. She made a comeback. She's better than ever. Give that just a moment to settle in.